So in the previous video, we put in a whole bunch of forms in our buyer template. Now in this video, we want to talk about some of the things that you might fill into those forms, things that are more permanent, that could stay in your template so that when it's uploaded into a buyer contract, all these items are already filled in. Keep watching. So let's start with the buyer-tenant representation agreement. Now, a lot of these forms are subjective to the situation, and you always want to check with your broker about filling out these forms. So let's take a quick look at some of the things that we might see that may be more permanent, so to speak, in the forms. So first of all, let's take a look at the buyer-tenant representation agreement. Now we have two of those. You always want to check with your broker on how to fill out these forms, but let's take a quick look and see some of the spaces that are available to be filled out and what you could put in some of them. In this short form, this is the buyer-tenant representation form, the short form. And so you put in the client's information up top here, your brokerage information. Your brokerage information will be one of those things that would usually stay the same for all of your buyer tenant agreements, unless you change brokerages, but you put in your brokerage information there. And the definition of the area, so you're putting in the area where you're going to be showing them property. You can make it as specific as you want. It could be a specific property address. It could be a whole county or several counties, whatever you are able to cover in your services. The term covers the period in which when you start and when the agreement is going to be over. Number 5, you're specifying if you're a full service agent for this person, representing them full service, representing their interest in the transaction, or if you're just showing them the property or properties. Depending on what you fill out here would affect the rest of 6, 7, and 8. It says 6, 7, and 8 do not apply if you are just doing a showing service. Assuming you're representing them as a full service broker, you would fill out information here in 7 with the specific percentage or dollar amount for your services, your fees, or if you're leasing, if they're tenants that are looking to rent a property, lease a property, you put in that information here as far as your fees go. And 8 would be checking off whether or not you're going to be in clause 8, you're specifying whether or not the tenant allows you to show them property that's listed by your brokerage. Usually it's a yes, so that they can see everything, including what's listed by your brokerage. But again, this is case specific. There's also the buyer-tenant representation agreement that we're looking at. This is the long form. So here would be your client's information and your brokerage information. So your brokerage information, again, would be something that you would probably fill out in your template so that it carries on from one to the other, one transaction to the other, already pre-filled, and you don't have to go in there and fill out your brokerage information again in each one. So you put in the address, you put in all the information for your brokerage, so that way you already have it all in there whenever you are transferring it to an actual transaction. Make sure to put in the address. The area of coverage, if you want, you could put in your usual area of coverage and make it wide, make it, Tarrant County or Dallas County or whatever county where you're at. And you could even say Dallas and surrounding counties, whatever your coverage, your service coverage is. Again, this is Texas specific. Though even in a different state, you probably have similarities between some of these forms. Term would be when your agreement starts and when it ends. Your fees would also be put in here, just like you had in the short form. This is the space for your fees here in the long form. Additional compensation, read through, and case by case, put in information as needed. Protection period, you might say 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. So that's one of the things that you could put in there to be carried from one contract to the other if you want to keep the same amount of time for your protection period. The county where the broker is paid, since your broker is likely to be the same, unless you change brokerages, you could put in the county and have that as a pre-filled space to be carried on to every contract. Relocation is subjective. If there's any relocation company or employer involved, that's where you're going to put it in. Intermediary status, for the most part, is yes in my own experience, but if it's not in yours, then you can leave that empty and have that as a something that you fill out case by case on each transaction. The information about brokerage services is also required usually. And then if you wanted to add anything else so that it's pre-filled, like the wire fraud warning, and it will be carried on from for any subsequent contract where you apply this template. And that's pretty much it. If you, the subject special provisions would definitely be case by case if you had to fill anything in there. So we're going back to our list of forms, the information about brokerage services. This is a form where you just fill out pretty much all your brokerage information and your own information as it applies to this form, the license numbers, email addresses, and phone numbers. With this form, you can also upload one if you have it already filled out somewhere. You can click on Add Document and upload it into your template so you don't have to fill it out. You already have one that's filled out in your template. The 1 to 4 contract is very detailed, and that's something that I'll definitely suggest that you speak with your broker on how to fill it out. The things that are just standard would be, you know, your brokerage information, if there's any space for that. So this form, the 1 to 4 family residential contract, this is very case specific to the property that your buyer is placing an offer on. So I would definitely recommend having training on how to fill the contract out from your broker. So the 1 to 4 family residential contract, the third party financing addendum, are very case specific on a property. So I'll definitely recommend having your broker or mentor provide training on how to do that. We might even do a training specific to those forms and just talk about the different spaces where we can fill things out for both of those. The addendum for property subject to mandatory homeowners association is also pretty specific to the property and how many days you want to put in for the submission of the documents from the HOA, the resale certificate, and all of that goes in here. And also how much the buyer might be contributing towards those fees goes in here. And who's going to pay the rest of the fees goes in there. So your mentor, broker, can give specifics on that. It is definitely case specific to the contract. The seller's disclosure regarding the lead paint form. Many times this will be provided on the listing, but sometimes it's not. However, As long as the property is built before 1978, there is some buyer information here to be filled out, whether the buyer waives the opportunity to conduct a risk. So the seller's disclosure regarding lead paint form that might be provided on the listing. But if the property is built before 1978, there are spaces here for the buyer to fill out. And there's a form to provide to the buyer, usually the pamphlet regarding protecting your family from lead from lead in your home to provide to the buyer. This is that pamphlet regarding protecting your family from lead in your home. It's several pages long, and you can provide that to your buyer. However you see best, it's 20 pages. The addendum concerning the right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. It's a form that could be used on a conventional loan if there's concern about the property not appraising for the purchase price that's agreed on the contract. And so the buyer can either waive that requirement for it to appraise, they can do a partial waiver, or they can put in clause in here saying that they have a right to renegotiate or terminate if the property does not appraise to meet the value of the purchase price. The non-realty items, addendum, this is used for a non-realty item. So if it's a refrigerator, washer, dryer, that it's been included in the transaction, this is where you can add it. If there's a fee for that addition of the non-realty items, this is where that fee goes. Sometimes it's 0, so you can leave that empty and put a 0 in there when you're sending it out for signatures. So the amendment to contract form, this could be used for any changes to the initial contract. It could be a change in the purchase price. It could be documenting repairs that the seller is going to complete prior to the closing, the changing of the closing date, a lot of different things, even an extension of the option period. So this just documents any changes to the original contract after the original contract is fully executed. The wire fraud document, it's a warning for the sellers and the buyers in this case, so it doesn't require much of filling out except for the signature blocks at the bottom. The intermediary relationship notice, this is used if your buyer is purchasing a property that's listed by your broker as well. So you're going to put in the seller's information, the buyer's information, your brokerage information, and the property address. You put in the date, and then you're going to specify if the broker is assigning or appointing a specific realtor to communicate with the different parties. And usually it would be a will appoint licensed associates to communicate with. And you would put in the information of the seller's agent here and your information as the buyer's agent in the second line. Any additional information would be here. Usually I see that blank. And then you fill out the signature blocks at the bottom. This is one of the forms that I hope that you don't use a whole lot of, which is the termination of the contract. But sometimes it does come in necessary for the buyer to terminate the contract. So this is the form we use for that. Very commonly, we see a termination due to during the option period or inspection period, and that's the box that would check off. So whichever applies to the cause of the termination, that's what you're going to check off in this form. The release of earnest money form usually accompanies the termination form. If the buyer is due for a release of the earnest money, then this form would be filled out and put in the property address, put it in the escrow agent, that's the title company, the amount of money to be released and to whom. And then you fill out all the information in the signature blocks, including the cooperating broker and the listing broker. Cooperating broker would be yourself as the buyer's agent, and then the listing broker would be the seller's agent. And you fill out all of that information. The addendum for sale of other property by buyer is definitely case specific. So if the buyer has another property to sell prior to their purchasing the current property that they're looking to purchase, this is the form that would be filled out. And so you put in information about the property that they are looking to sell. The time frame of the contingency goes in here. The number of days the buyer has to waive the contingency when the seller notifies them of another offer that comes in that they would like to accept, goes in there. And if the buyer is going to put in any additional deposits when they waive the contingency, that goes in there. Again, with all these forms, please do check with your broker to confirm, reconfirm, and make sure of all the information that you're putting in them. Having these forms pre-filled just makes it so much easier when you have a contract so that you can have all that information already pre-filled, and then you fill in the blanks as needed, case specific on that particular transaction. Happy house hunting.